Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining me for today's Pineapple Support webinar. Stressed Out, Understanding and Managing Stress for Sex Workers. This webinar was designed specifically with sex workers in mind, recognizing the unique stressors faced by this population. My name is Dr. Tess Kilwein, and I am a therapist with Pineapple Support. Being stressed out in this industry does not mean that you are not good at your job or love it any less. Stress is a nervous system response to the demands, the uncertainty, and the pressure, which are really common facets of this industry. Many of you tuning in today are likely navigating financial stress, stigma, emotional labor, even safety concerns, and unpredictable work conditions. So today's webinar is all about understanding how stress actually shows up, both in the body and the mind, and giving you the practical tools that you need that are realistic, adaptable, and respectful of your lived experience. Let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk about what stress actually is, because it's thrown out in all kinds of different ways. Stress, while it feels not so great, is actually a protective mechanism. So it's your nervous system responding to perceived threat or demand in the world around you. These threats can be all kinds of different things. They can be physical, more likely emotional, social, or financial in this industry. And again, experiencing this stress does not mean that you are doing something wrong or failing to cope with stress. Everyone experiences stress to some degree in their lives. But it's when that stress becomes chronic, meaning it doesn't turn off. It feels really difficult to manage. It starts to affect all kind of areas of your psychological functioning, your relationships, your occupational performance. When that starts to happen, that's when we need to take a look at how are we managing stress and how is it showing up in your life. So think about your own life. When you're stressed, do you start to notice challenges with your sleep? Maybe you're not able to go to sleep, you're waking up too early or too late, you're fatigued throughout the day, your mood. So maybe you're experiencing mood swings, low mood overall, less interest in things that you used to enjoy. Digestion. So sometimes we actually experience this in really physical ways in our body, and GI functioning can be one of the first ones. Concentration, memory, thinking, processing, all of these kind of things in our minds. In this industry and more in our personal lives, but changes in libido. So finding that you maybe experience less arousal or less desire towards your partner or partners, and immune functioning. So it's not uncommon for folks who are chronically stressed to also be chronically sick, right? So that cough that'll never go away. Again, that fatigue, these really chronic symptoms that don't seem to go away. This is when we're realizing that stress has maybe become chronic in your life and is no longer managed in the way that it needs to be. So understanding what stress is and what it's not is how we remove the shame and replace it with options that are realistic to manage it. So it's no longer I'm stressed, so I'm just not good at managing stress, or I'm not able to cope or function in this industry. With there are realistic ways to manage the stress that is really exacerbated in this industry. So let's talk about some stressors that are unique to sex workers in particular. So sex workers carry just layers of stress that are often invisible to others. And this is both in their personal lives and their professional lives. So these stressors can include stigma, which we talk about a lot. And while in some spaces that stigma is decreasing, we still find high rates of stigma in families, in relationships, in the media, whatever it may be, a lot of fear mongering. So that's often really unique to this type of work. Fear of disclosure is another way stress might be unique to a sex worker. Fear of disclosure, again, family, personal relationships, other occupational spaces, the risks that can come with disclosure of this work. Legal risk, and this is something that we're navigating in different ways over time. And then the emotional labor of managing so many other people's expectations and desires and reactions, both clients, right? People who consume our content, but also in personal and family relationships. Now, the reality of these things is that they're heavy and they weigh on someone over time. And that's why looking at this more chronic stress that accumulates over time among sex workers is really important for us to pay attention to. So even though you may love your work, and 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 you're really invested and it's aligned with your values, and this is the what you want to be doing for your career, the systems that often surround sex work that you have less control over can still be really stressful, right? So the legal climate, the political climate, if you have bosses, right, like the producers, all these kind of things, even if you love what you do and it really aligns with your values, sometimes we don't get control all these other systems that add on the stress. So, like I've mentioned more than once, stress does not mean that you dislike your job. So, just because you're stressed doing it doesn't mean that you've chosen the wrong line of work. It might mean your nervous system is responding to the really real complexity, uncertainty, and risk of this field. And it's time to take a further look. So I know I've mentioned nervous system functioning a few times, and I don't expect anyone to be an expert on all the inner workings of our bodies, but let's talk a little bit more about what nervous system functioning is and why it's relevant to this conversation about stress. Your nervous system has one job, and that is to keep you alive. It is survival. So when your nervous system detects danger, overwhelm, chronic stress, it quickly shifts into survival mode. How do we keep this person safe and alive? And that might look like anxiety. It might look like irritability, numbness, exhaustion, or even hypervigilance, right? Trying to protect yourself. So we often hear on the slide here of the function of our nervous system. You go into fight, you go into flight, you go into freeze, or you go into fawn. Fawn is a little less common one, but what that means is you go into this mode of just like desperately trying to keep the peace. And I see this one a lot with people that work in this industry is that we sometimes ignore our own needs to accommodate the needs of other people. And so when there is danger or a threat or an overwhelm, our nervous system goes into one of these modes: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, sometimes a combination of them. And how that looks is keeping the peace, exhaustion, hypervigilance, anxiety, irritability, all these things that I mentioned. So what your nervous system does is it's not forcing yourself to calm down. Sometimes it's actually looking to protect yourself, to fight, to freeze, whatever it might be. So what it means is that your body needs to feel safer. So the idea when nervous system is really out of control, what we want to do is regulate that nervous system, bring it back to a sense of calm and safety so you can shift out of that survival mode. And that's what we're talking about here today is how do we manage chronic stress? How do we protect our nervous system and respond when all it's trying to do is protect us and keep us safe? One of the most important keys in this conversation is that suppressing stress, so just pushing it down, ignoring that it's there, pretending we're not burnt out, right? It often backfires. So you might, in the short term, be able to push away that stress or that crisis moment and go on with your day. But what's going to happen is that stress is going to rebound and it's going to show up in really maybe unanticipated or unpredictable ways in our lives. So what we want to do is recognize when stress is coming on. If you need to contain it or avoid it for a moment, that's okay, but we have to revisit it. We have to ask ourselves, what is causing the stress? How do we manage it? Versus shoving it away, and then it comes back time and time again in ways that we're less able to manage. So the key here is finding ways to support and regulate the nervous system is more effective than just shutting it out and pushing it away. So, on the topic of burnout, I love to talk about burnout because it is so present in the adult industry among sex workers. And the reality is, burnout is more common in industries that people are expected to perform, right? And we are performers at the end of the day. So, burnout is not just being tired, it's not just being stressed or fatigued, right? But what it is when the demand for this work, the demand on our nervous systems, on our bodies and our mind consistently outweighs the recovery over time. That's when someone gets burnt out. So it's normal for someone to, have a demanding job or be stressed. But what happens is if this industry or the life that you're living doesn't give you appropriate time to rest, recover, bounce back, then burnout is going to accumulate over time to a point that you are forced to rest because you're no longer able to function. So, emotional fatigue is what results from burnout over time if we're not taking care of ourselves or we're not given the space or time to take care of ourselves, which is more real in this industry. So, when that happens, when this emotional fatigue results from burnout, it shows up really differently for everyone. Some common responses we hear from people are feeling numb, so almost feeling like you're just kind of going through the motions and not experiencing any emotions, especially not positive emotions. Cynicism, so feeling maybe pretty negative or hopeless about the state of the world or your work or your personal lives, or withdrawal. Some people withdraw from their work or their personal lives completely. So if you find that, you're feeling emotionally numb, you're feeling cynical, or someone's told you that, or you're feeling a little bit withdrawn from things in your life, that's when it's time to take a look at, okay, has the stress accumulated over time to the point that now I'm burnout and need to take some time to manage that? Now, what happens is we often don't know when burnout hits because it accumulates over time. Instead, it can often be misunderstood both by ourselves and people that maybe we're working with or expected to perform for as losing motivation or interest in the job. But that's not always a fair interpretation. And that's why I really like to highlight just because you're stressed, just because you're burnt out, doesn't mean that you don't love the thing, you don't love the work, that you're not motivated, that you're not interested, or you're just lazy. Those are things we often hear. That's not fair to us. And for sex workers specifically, burnout can be really intensified by the need to perform, emotional availability, managing other people's reactions on a near daily basis, right? So, both in our professional and our personal lives, you're holding a lot for other people. You're expected to perform, you're expected to show up for people's emotions in really different ways. So, burnout can really be intensified here. And again, that doesn't mean you're not motivated or you're not interested or you don't love the work. Instead, what we need to recognize is that rest is crucially important. And this one is a tough one because a lot of folks in this industry aren't given the space or time or financial security to get the rest that they need. So I want to emphasize that it's more than just rest. Rest alone is not the solution, but burnout often requires an active role in nervous system repair, not just time off. So, actively looking at what are the things that led me to this point? What do I need to do to regulate and provide some emotional and psychological safety back to my nervous system in a way that when I return to the work or I continue with the work, I prevent the risk of this happening again. So, it is a much more active process than rest and recovery alone. Yes, if you have the time and space for rest and recovery, you can and should take that. And that's often not enough to prevent a reoccurrence or burnout from happening in the future. So let's talk about some ways to actually do that, to return some stability and safety to our nervous system. And one of the fastest ways to influence stress is through the body, because that's where it's felt, right? So a couple ways that people do this is through breathing as a regulation tool. So what we know is when we engage in this slow, intentional breathing process, it sends signals from our body to our brain that we are safe here. So it tells our nervous system we are safe, we are regulated in this moment. So this is one that can be pulled out even in the really short term, right? So you can do just a few quick breaths or 5 minutes of breathing if you have the time, but really taking a moment to slow down our nervous system, which when we're stressed tends to activate, right? So we're maybe breathing quickly or we're not taking the time to be aware of our breath. So if you're finding that, stress is adding up over time, or even within a day, you're feeling really overwhelmed, take a couple minutes to just engage in some slow, intentional breathing to return that sense of safety to your nervous system. So let's do that just real quickly right now. If you feel comfortable, go ahead and close your eyes, but make sure you're feeling comfortable in your chair. Crossing your legs, uncrossing your legs is often a good idea. So I'm going to ask everyone to take a deep breath in through their nose. Hold it at the top and breathe out through pursed lips. Good. And the reason I don't count specifically is that count looks differently for everybody. So let's breathe in again through your nose. Hold it at the top and breathe out through pursed lips. Let's do this one more time. Breathe in and breathe out. Now, that took less than a minute, right? And I don't know about you, but I feel a little bit calmer already. Now, the reality of this is sometimes people engage in this process and they actually become more stressed or more dysregulated. Not a bad thing. It's a messenger. So what that's telling you is your nervous system may be dysregulated in a way that a few couple breaths is not actually gonna to return your nervous system to safety and regulation. So that might mean you actually need to take a little bit bigger of a break. Maybe you need to get up and move around. Maybe you need to take some rest, talk to someone, whatever it might be. But generally, the idea is if we can engage in this slow, intentional return to our breath, it tells our nervous system, okay, we're safe here, we're alive, we don't need to be in survival moment, and then you can return to the task at hand. Now, even a few longer exhales, so we did that pretty quickly, can reduce physiological arousal. So again, that's why I don't count. You determine the breathing practice that makes the most sense for you. How long you need to breathe in, how long you need to hold, and the longer the exhale, the more kind of physiological arousal can be reduced in the body. Now, another tool is grounding through the senses. So, this can be as simple as noticing the pressure through your feet, right? So, noticing, okay, my feet are on the ground and I feel that I'm here, I'm alive, I'm safe right here. Can be naming five things that you can see. So in this room, okay, I actually have my cat and my dog on the bed in front of me. I can see the visual of myself on the screen presenting. I've got a lamp on the side here. I've got my coffee mug to the side, my cell phone to the other, right? So just reminding yourself, hey, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm in the present moment can bring you a sense of grounding. Another thing people do is hold something cold or textured, so or hot, right? So again, I've got my coffee mug here, which is warm. Some people will put their hands under cold water or on ice or an ice pack, or play with something that has texture, right? So again, the idea here is just to bring you back to the present moment, ground you through the senses, remind your nervous system, we're here, we're okay. A last thing that I like to introduce is micro movement. So, a lot of times when people talk about regulating stress, they talk about exercise. Exercise is not accessible for everyone in the same ways, for financial reasons, for accessing like equipment and going to a gym. And so I talk about micro movements instead. If you're an exerciser and you can go to the yoga class or go on the exercise machine, that is great. Do that. But if that's just not part of your practice, think about micro movements. So that could be stretching, right? Which is something you can do in your own home. I encourage people who sit a lot in the day to just even take the time to stand up a little bit, shake things out a little bit, but just engaging in these micro movements again to send a signal to your body like, okay, I'm here, I'm regulated, this is me. Now, the key about these tools and any other ones that you might use is that they work best when they are practiced regularly, not only during a crisis. So, if you engage in these breathing techniques or grounding or movement or whatever it may be regularly, they're going to be much easier to pull out in the moment of emotional overwhelm or crisis. Versus now you're in a crisis, it's pretty hard to tell yourself, okay, now I need to pull out this tool where I need to like see five things that I can see. It's going to be easier if you've already practiced that when you're calm. So think to yourself, is there one thing on this slide or one thing that you already do and works that you might be able to incorporate even on a daily basis, right? So maybe before I start my work for the day, I do 5 minutes of breathing. Maybe at lunchtime, I go through this grounding. Maybe, every couple hours, I remind myself to do some type of movement. Think about what works best for you in your current workplace and environment. Okay, so now that we have talked a little bit about some practical skills, I also want to emphasize that there is this culture of toxic positivity out there, right? Both in our industry and in general. You don't need to reframe everything into gratitude or positivity. So we deal with some really real stuff in this work, right? And so, the stigma, the abuse that sometimes is experienced in this industry. And if we're expected to reframe everything as like a positive or gratitude, that really negates the real experiences that are challenging in this world. So I want to emphasize that engaging in emotional self-care means allowing yourself to feel the feelings, let those exist without judging them, and without trying to fix them immediately. So sometimes it's just naming the emotion, acknowledging it's a messenger, it's trying to tell me something. I'm anxious. Okay, it means I need to prepare for this thing. I'm sad. Okay, there's something in my life to be sad about and I need to pay attention to it. I'm angry. Oh, well, there's something to be angry about or someone to be angry towards. So thinking of emotions as messengers rather than something that we need to judge or fix or act on right away. Now, self-compassion is not indulgence. So you don't need to stay positive, but what you do want to do is stay compassionate towards yourself and give yourself some grace. So even in the presence of tough emotions and tough experiences, if you can say to yourself, okay, well, even in light of all of this, I'm going to still show myself some grace and compassion in this. I'm not going to judge myself for it. Research shows that this actually lowers stress hormones and increases resilience. So you're not ignoring the difficult thing, but you're acknowledging, okay, I'm here, I'm present for it, it's real, and I'm going to give myself grace anyways. And what happens is it lowers our stress hormones, regulates our nervous system, and it actually makes us more resilient when difficult things hit in the future. So, be kind to yourself and think of this as a physiological intervention, not toxic positivity. So it's finding this balance. You can be kind even in the hardest moments while still acknowledging that those moments are hard. Let's talk a little bit about boundaries. Boundaries, especially in this industry, are one of the most effective stress reduction tools that are available to us. And boundaries can be a lot of things. They can include limits around your availability, right? So maybe it's how many hours you work in a day, how many clients you might work with, how many things you do within a week or a month, right? You get to decide what that means for you. But in the absence of any kind of limits around availability, you're going to find yourself saying yes to more and more things that are compromising those boundaries and those values. Flexibility is great, right? But within this bigger picture of like, this is my general availability, these are my general boundaries and things I'm not willing to compromise. It can also be boundaries and setting limits around your pricing, right? So again, flexibility might be warranted, but you also get to say, hey, this is what I'm worth and this is what I'm deserving of, and maintain boundaries around your pricing, even when people push and negotiate. Can be limits around how and when and how often you communicate, especially in ways that are not compensated for in emotional engagement. So, to what level you engage in emotional labor for other people, again, when it's not compensated or it's outside of the terms of an agreement that you've already set. So, boundaries can be both flexible and firm at the same time is the key here. And emotional labor can have its limits, both in our professional and personal lives. You get to set limits around how much you carry for other people. You are allowed to protect your energy without apologizing for doing that protection. So boundaries, think of them not as punishment, right? But they are a form of harm reduction for your nervous system. They tell you what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept. They tell yourself that. They tell other people that. They're not punishing other people. It's just showing this is what I'm worth. This is where I'm willing to compromise and where I'm not. And in the end, we usually find that there's a higher level of respect between people when boundaries are really clear and set in the relationship. So on the note of harm reduction, the key here is that not all coping with stress is ideal, and that is okay. So, the idea here is that harm reduction focuses on minimizing the negative impact of a behavior rather than demanding perfection. So, I totally acknowledge that, sometimes people engage in substance use or sex or eating or whatever it may be in ways that we're maybe not always proud of or aren't always the best for us, right? But the key here is not to judge yourself for that, to give yourself some compassion in those moments and focus more on how do I reduce the harms that could come from this behavior rather than having to be perfect all the time, because that's a really high bar. Again, this work is real, it's demanding, and sometimes the ways that we cope with that may not be societally acceptable at all times. And what matters more is how you show up yourself with compassion and grace, you minimize the negative impact, and then you adjust if you need to move forward. So, if it is a coping strategy that helps you survive, that has costs, the goal is to add options, not take support away. So I think of like smoking. I think there's a lot of judgment towards smoking, but if that is something that's helping you survive in the moment, it has some negative health costs, right? The goal is to add some different options. Okay, is there something I could do to replace this, or might I do it less or differently in certain ways, not take away the support altogether if it's something that you need? especially in the short term. If you need to engage in a coping skill that's less than ideal, you do that if you need to survive, and then we come back to it later and look at, okay, what are some options or different coping skills or ways I might deal with this in the future? I see too often, though, we talk about, again, kind of this toxic positivity of like, you've got to do all the things and do all the perfect coping mechanisms. And that's just not always realistic for people, and it's not always accessible for people. So I'm here to tell you whatever you need to do to cope with the trauma you experienced or the current climate of this world or the challenges of this industry, like that's okay. Not all coping is ideal. We can always make adjustments to things, but judging yourself for that coping isn't going to do you any favors in trying to make changes over time. So regulating our nervous system grows through having choices in the way that we cope, being flexible in the way that we cope, not shaming ourselves for coping in the less than ideal ways. Meet yourself where you're at. I think that's the most important key. Now, realistically, sometimes stress exceeds what our own coping skills, our own self-care strategies alone can address. So there are sometimes that we experience stress in a way that no amount of micro movement or grounding or breathing is going to resolve. These are more short-term, mild, low-intensity coping resources for stress that we chronically experience in this industry. Now, if you find that you're experiencing ongoing sleep problems, shutting down emotionally, or increased reliance on some of these maybe less than ideal coping mechanisms we're talking about, like substances or unhealthy relationship patterns, these are signs that your nervous system needs more support than you're currently able to provide it on your own. Seeking help in this is not a failure. It is recognizing that your current coping skills and resources, the demands that you're experiencing are above and beyond that, right? And so seeking help can look a lot of ways. It can be seeking it professionally, which I'll talk about in a minute. It can also be like letting your partner or your partners or your family members or your friends know, like, hey, things are getting really heavy for me right now. I'm doing my best to cope with it, but I could use a little extra support, right? Going to a support group, going to a workshop, anything like that. Just keep in mind that seeking help in these situations is not a failure. It is actually like a really adaptive and flexible response to sustained stress that is really present in this industry over time. So, how do we use support? How do we seek it? How do we use it without losing autonomy, losing who you are, losing your sense of control? I think that's really real in this industry too, is a lot of folks have experienced boundary violations or loss of autonomy, so threats to that can feel really real. This is why I want to emphasize that mental health support, professional support, should respect your autonomy, your values, and your work, not threaten or take those away. It should feel collaborative, like you are an equal participant in the process. Your therapist should approach the work with curiosity and teamwork and wanting to work together to find solutions rather than stripping your autonomy, values, or your work away. You know, if a therapist says to you, like, you just need to stop work in this industry, that's sometimes a red flag, right? Like some curiosity needs to be approached with that. You need to make those decisions together. So, if you're working with a mental health provider and you're not sure, is this the right fit for me? Is this the right space for my socio-emotional growth? You can ask some questions, right? Ask your therapist, okay, what kind of training do they have in working with sex workers? What does it mean to them to be sex work affirming? What are their values and biases and how do they show up in the room? A good therapist that's done this work is going to be open to answering those questions for you and having that conversation if that's what you need to build trust in that relationship. It's also okay to set boundaries in the therapeutic relationship. It's okay to say, you know, it's just really not appropriate when you tell me I just need to quit my job without looking at other solutions. It's not appropriate when you say this thing that is stigmatizing or shaming. You are allowed to set boundaries and give feedback to your provider. And most importantly, you're allowed to change providers if something does not feel right. If maybe you've asked some questions and you've attempted to set boundaries and there continues to be violations of your autonomy, your values, or the work that you choose to do, it's okay to say, this is not the person I need to work with. This is not a good fit for me at this time. So, Industry affirming care is really, really important. That is why pineapple support exists because it recognizes that people doing this work benefit from tailored services from people that understand the unique demands of this industry and do not approach the work in a way that stigmatizes or shames it further than society already does. So, working with someone who's both knowledgeable from an educational standpoint about this work, but also affirming of the work that you do, like shares the same values that you do. This is important so you don't spend extra time in the therapeutic process doing the emotional labor of explaining yourself, defending yourself time and time again. If you find yourself doing it, that therapist is not the right fit for you. Support, professional support should always increase your sense of agency and choice in this work, not take it away. So if you maybe are working with someone right now and you're realizing a lot of these things that I'm explaining are showing up, it might be time to ask your therapist a question, set a boundary with your therapist, or consider changing providers. So in closing, and resources, the key takeaway is that stress is not your fault. Stress is a part of this line of work. It is non-negotiable. It's going to show up. So think of it as a predictable response to the conditions that many sex workers live and work under. Stress is going to happen. We need to anticipate it. And instead of trying to push it away or prevent or avoid it, we want to recognize that there are real strategies to show up for yourself when chronic stress hits. There are ways that you can regulate your nervous system, both through rest and recovery when that is appropriate and accessible, and these more active strategies of grounding, breathing, micro movements, seeking support from your friends and your family and your partners, and then seeking professional support if you need it. So, nothing about experiencing stress in the context of sex worker is a personal failure. It does not mean that you love your job any less or that you're less motivated to do it. The reality is, regulating our emotions, even in the face of high stress, is a skill that can be learned and practiced and adapted to your life. So learn these things now, do them preventatively so they're easy to pull out in the moments that feel like a crisis or an overwhelm. And even if you do that, even if you do all that well, you still might find yourself under circumstances of burnout or overwhelm. And that is when you get to both show up for yourself and allow other people to show up for you to help you carry it. Pineapple support, of course, exists to make these affirming mental health resources accessible, and you deserve support that sees you fully. So, what we offer, the individual one-on-one support where you can talk in more detail with a therapist like myself to look at how is burnout showing up for you, what strategies might we need to adjust or put in place to help prevent it in the future and to get through it. There are also a whole host of webinars like this one. Each month we release one new, and then there's also the library of webinars. You might find, okay, yeah, she talked about burnout today, and that's so real for me. There's another webinar specifically on burnout, talking about how do I set boundaries in my personal or professional relationships. Okay, there's a whole webinar on boundaries, right? And so recognizing this is a thing that shows up in my personal and professional life, I need some more education or support around and seek it out. Lastly, there are also wonderful, wonderful support groups offered through Pineapple Support that give you the time and space to be with other people with shared experiences, right? So it's not uncommon in this industry, especially when you're predominantly online, to feel really isolated, to feel alone in your stress and concerns. So even having that, once a week or a drop-in session with other people with shared experiences can make you feel a lot less alone, can be that form of support that you need to further regulate your nervous system. And with that, I just want to thank you for showing up for yourself today, talking about stress and thinking of ways to regulate it and actively engaging in those strategies is a lot harder than just shoving it away and pretending that it's not there, right? So by you tuning in today, you just spent this amount of time showing up for yourself to better regulate your nervous system in ways that shoving it down and pretending it doesn't exist are not going to help you in the long term. So even if you're feeling a little bit activated right now, that's okay. That's showing that you are allowing your body to feel and reflect on maybe how it's doing in this present moment, in this context. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling intense, that's a messenger. That's something telling you, okay, I need to learn a little bit more about this. I need to talk a little bit more about this. It is always my honor to discuss understanding and managing stress for sex workers. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.